I want the audience to hear every single word and get every image that Dylan Thomas was intending. I want to get all the ideas, all the colours, all the imagery. So I have to be absolutely on it all the time, and I have to go through it constantly.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this very special event to celebrate the new National Theatre production of Under Milkwood that first opened on the 23rd of June 2021. It's directed by Lindsay Turner and has additional material by Sean Owen. I'm going to be talking to three of the cast members. It's a 14-strong ensemble cast: Michael Sheen, Siân Phillips and Kezrena James. But before that, for those of you who are visually impaired, I'm just going to describe myself so you can imagine where I'm sitting. So I'm a short white woman of nearly 60 wearing glasses. I'm sitting in my study at home where I do all my writing. There are books behind me, a big map on the wall and a lamp. And I'm wearing headphones so that I can hear you and you can hear me. Under Milkwood is one of those classic, important texts. It's possibly the text of modern day Wales. It was described as a play for voices. Dylan Thomas wrote it and performed it, a bit of it himself, just before he died in November 1953. The very famous recording is the BBC recording with Richard Burton reading Voice One as it's described. Both Siân Phillips and Michael Sheen have appeared in versions of Under Milkwood before, but this is a very different version, and we'll come on to that. Before we get going, I just want to say something on behalf of the National Theatre. This is being made available free online, and that's of course wonderful and important, because this is all about sharing extraordinary work and extraordinary theatre makers' work all over the world with as many people as possible. If you enjoy what you see and what you listen to, do consider making a donation if you can, because it's incredibly important that as many people as possible can join in with the work of the National Theatre, wherever they are, whatever their backgrounds, whatever their interests. So do press the donate button if you feel that you can, and we'd be very, very grateful indeed. Right, now on to introducing the people who are on this call today: Michael Sheen, Siân Phillips and Kezrena James, and they're each going to introduce themselves to you before we start talking about this incredible production of Under Milkwood.
I'm Michael Sheen. I am a 52-year-old hairy Welshman. I am in my dressing room. I have some beautiful cream white flowers behind my left shoulder, framed by some red curtains, and I would like to say it's rather beautiful. And that's me.
Hello, I'm Siân Phillips, and I'm sitting in a totally featureless dressing room. I've got my back to a blank wall and a door. They're nicer bits, but anyway, that's where I am.
Because Siân brings her beauty herself. She needs nothing to frame her.
Oh, I paid him a fortune this morning. Anyway, and I am a tallish white person, and I'm of a certain age, which is putting it mildly, and that's it really.
Hiya, I'm Kezrena. I'm a black woman who is about 5'3", in my dressing room, and I'm born and bred in Cardiff, and that's it.
Thank you. Well, I can see where you all are, and I must say, Michael, your dressing room has come up trumps compared to everybody else's. But that's the National Theatre.
Some elves came in before I got here and did this.
You've got homemade shoes under the desk as well, I'm sure. So before we get too much into individual parts of the production, I just wondered what it was like for all of you. You all know the NT, and of course you've performed in many productions there and at different times, and of course in many other versions, Siân and Michael, of Under Milkwood. But what was it like going back after the year that year and a half everybody's had, into the rehearsal room? Can you just tell us a little bit about how it felt that morning, and were you wearing masks, and did you have to all sit separately? What was it like on that very first day of school?
Well, we were all in the rehearsal room, beautiful rehearsal room here at the National, and there were marked squares on the floor. Usually in a rehearsal room, the stage management team will have used white tape to mark out the stage space, so that when you're in the rehearsal room, you get a sense of where the stage is and where the exits are, and if there's any any particular things in the set design, they might be marked out on the floor in tape, and that's how you rehearse. But in this case, they'd use the same tape to mark out little boxes of squares all around the rehearsal room, and each one of us had our own little box to be in. And that was quite extraordinary. And we had our masks on, and we had little buzzers round our necks that were supposed to buzz if you came within 2 meters of another buzzer. That got ditched quite soon because it just buzzed all the time. It didn't seem to care whether it was 2 meters or not. It just buzzed all the time. But I specifically remember Rufus Norris, who's the artistic director here, who on the first day of rehearsals here at the National will always come and say hello and welcome you to the rehearsal room. And I just remember how emotional Rufus was, because I know a little bit. I've spoken to him over the last year or so a couple of times, and I know the pressure he's been under and the decisions that he's had to make, the very, very difficult decisions about staff and, and laying people off and just the difficulties around it. So you could see, I suppose, what it had taken to get us there that day because of all the paraphernalia of the restrictions. But I think you could see the emotionally what it had taken to get us there that day in the way that Rufus talked about having actors and crew and front of house people coming back into the theatre again. It was. I'll always remember that, I think. Do you remember that, Siân and Kez?
Yes, indeed. And there was even we had a COVID marshal. One of the stage staff here became a COVID marshal just for our rehearsal period and for our opening, and she had a long rod which was 3 meters apart. Long,
that and she used to beat us with if we got too close.
She would have done. So if we got too close, even when we were acting, she would come up and lay down the rod, and we would back off. And it's so different. I can't begin to tell you how different it is from normal. It's very. It was wonderful, but it was very strange. Very strange.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, because the instinct as well. Of a person, of a human being, is to get close up to someone or touch someone, and so that was getting used to that was interesting.
Once you were rehearsing, did it feel like usual, I suppose, that the play is the thing and it was about how you with your director Lindsay Turner made the play work? Were you aware of that additional burden, I suppose?
Yes, I think so, actually. With the best will in the world, you had to be aware of it. Otherwise, it would have been a terrible shock when we got into the theatre. So we were aware of it, and the more shallow among us, myself included, of course, missed the canteen so terribly, because that's where all the gossip happens and all the chats and all the everything nice really about a rehearsal happens in the canteen, and there was no canteen, so we used to have to retreat to our dressing rooms when we were off on our own.
And when did that change? Because obviously on stage there is closer contact, or did that same level of social distancing come from the rehearsal room onto the stage?
It came with us. It had to, really. We have to observe a certain distance on the stage. Yes.
Yeah. So it was very, specifically looked at to make sure that even though when we entered onto the marked out stage space in rehearsals, we could take our masks off, but we still had to keep 2 meters from each other, which was, a big added complication doing a play, particularly in the setting that we had set our version of the play in. That added a real extra layer of complication when there was already layers of complication. But we, at a certain point, we decided that myself and Carl, who plays my father in the show, that we would create what I think is known as a cohort, where the two of us would be able to essentially kind of create our own bubble so that we could physically be closer than 2 meters together, which had, a risk to it. We had to decide whether that risk was worth taking, because if we all kept 2 meters away from each other in the production, if one person was to test positive at some point, and we were all regularly testing twice a week, then that person obviously would have to self-isolate, but everyone else would be all right to continue the show. But in the case of myself and Carl, if we decided to make this cohort, then if either one of us was positive, the other one would have to self-isolate as well, which obviously in the case of this show would be quite tricky.
Yes.
But we felt that was a risk worth taking.
And I would
for
say,
our show.
as an audience member, artistically, it was essential. There is a moment very close to the end where you embrace, and that is heartbreaking and beautiful moment. There's some new material by the Newport writer Sean Owen, and rather than beginning with the famous beginning line of Under Milkwood to begin at the beginning, the decision has been made to frame it by putting the action in a care home. So rather than it being Dylan Thomas, the narrator as it were, talking to an audience, it's a son who arrives drunk with anger and drunk, talking to his father, and his father has dementia, Alzheimer's, it's not specified. And so it's a very different sort of way of getting into the beauty of the language. So when you first were sent the scripts, or you were first discussing playing the part, what were your feelings about this, the idea of setting it in a care home and framing it in a very different sort of way from the way it's been done before?
Well, I looked forward to doing it slightly differently, I must say, because I've never seen it on the stage, but I have heard it, and I've been in a television of it and a film of it, but so I've never seen all of it. But I was rather glad that had happened, actually. I was.
My beginning with it then, I suppose, was that I was asked whether I was interested in doing a production of Under Milkwood at the National to reopen the Olivier, which I thought was already, I was interested that play had been chosen to do that, which was, a huge deal. But I have to say, I was not massively excited to do a production of Under Milkwood, just in its own right. I mean, I've done it. I love the play. I think it's wonderful. I've been in a few different versions of it, so I, just to do a production of Under Milkwood. But the thing that piqued my interest was that Lindsay Turner was going to direct it, and at this point, I think it was still just a sort of having a conversation stage about whether I was interested, and I'm not even sure if it was definitely happening at that point, but so I thought it was definitely worth a conversation with Lindsay. So we met in Hyde Park and had the first of many long walks around Hyde Park having conversations that happened over the space of, I think it must have been about 6 months to a year or something. I mean, it was for a long time. And the very beginning, I suppose, was that Rufus wanted the plays that were done when the theatre was to reopen to reflect community. That that was very much what he wanted. I think he even talked about a sort of a folk theatre, and that Under Milkwood had been thought about in that context. The idea of something that was of the people, that reflected community and that kind of stuff. But Lindsay, whose work I'd seen various productions that she'd done, and I thought that was a fascinating. I mean, I would not have thought that Lindsay Turner would be directing a production of Under Milkwood. So I was like, okay, well, I'll have a chat with you about that. And very, very quickly, almost within the first 10 minutes of us talking, we both mentioned a production that I don't think Lindsay had seen, but I had seen not that long before in New York, of Oklahoma, the musical, the sort of classic musical Oklahoma, which had been done off Broadway and then on Broadway, which did absolutely the text of Oklahoma, but it was completely different. It was an extraordinary production, and about a community, but looking at a community in a completely different way, and bringing out all kinds of other tones and darknesses and complexities and things that were quite shocking and all kinds of stuff. And we used that as a sort of a touchstone to begin talking. So we and both of us knew that we wanted to make sure that what the character that is usually known as first voice, the narrator character, was going to be a character within the action, not an outsider or a sort of, just purely narration figure. We wanted to explore that possibility. And so the idea of a community, a character who is drawn to moving amongst that community, who maybe has quite a complicated relationship with that community, was our starting point for this production. And we talked about ideas like, maybe because there's first voice and second voice in the original Under Milkwood. And we talked about the idea that maybe first voice would be a father, second voice might be his young daughter, child, and going back to this community that maybe he's been ousted from, all these kinds of things. Ultimately, we got to the point where we knew we did want the central relationship to be a father and a child, but we realized that the child would be me, the narrator figure, and that the father would be someone that he had a very difficult relationship with. And so that's where the idea of the care home came from, and the contextualizing of the piece in order for my character to be a character. So it needed something, and that's when the idea of finding a Welsh writer, ultimately Siân Owen, to write something that would contextualize it came about, and that's how the idea developed from there, really. And we very much wanted, it wasn't at all that I've heard people say, oh, you should just trust the Under Milkwood text. It wasn't that we didn't trust the Under Milkwood text. We wanted to find a way to contextualize the Under Milkwood text that would allow certain elements of it to fly out in new ways and to bring all kinds of other textures to it, particularly to resonate with the sort of period of time that we'd all been going through, just before it. So that was what really excited me about it, I think.
So when, Siân, you first were involved in the production, did you have a similar sort of conversation? Maybe not quite so many walks around Hyde Park, but again, because you've played it before, did you think, well, what do I feel about this? Does it, you said you wanted to do it something slightly differently, not what you'd done before.
Yes, very much so. I became involved at a much later stage. And I was saving his blushes. I was interested in doing Under Milkwood because Michael was going to be what we call first voice. Then I didn't know what he was going to be called, and that Lindsay Turner was directing because she's a very, very interesting director. So I felt that whatever she did would be interesting, and I didn't know Kez at the time, or I would have joined because of Kez.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie. I love these actors and actresses right now, so I would have said yes anyway, to be honest, knowing that they were going to be in it.
Yes, it's a very, very happy company. It's an incredibly close company, and we've made friendships, so it's a lovely company.
Wonderful. I think I read that it is a majority Welsh company. And was that deliberate?
Yes, I think so. Well, yes, I suppose it is it?
I think there's only one person who's not Welsh.
Who's not Welsh? Cleo?
Cleo's not Welsh.
Cleo's not Welsh.
Everyone else is.
Yes.
So 13 out of 14.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good.
And Cleo is an honorary Welsh woman.
Yes, she is. Oh, yeah, we've adopted her.
So when you start a piece like this, do you read it all the way through together and then break it into sections and start to work at different parts of the script? Or do you keep rehearsing it all the way through together? For people who don't know how a rehearsal process works, could you just all share a little bit about what it means to rehearse to get the words ready, to get the words out to perform?
It depends on the director, because directors work differently, and it depends on the piece. I can't really remember. So we did a read through. I think we did one read through altogether, I think. But she kind of, maybe I'm fast forwarding, but she kind of took it in sections. And I remember, because there are certain scenes that not everyone is in, so then she would bring in certain people, if there's just a couple or 4 people or something, and then work on that scene with that small group of people. And that's how she kind of went through it scene by scene. We did some physical stuff together. Totally forgot about that. We did a lot of, as a group, before we went into scene work, we did a lot of physical warm-up together, which was really good, with Imogen, who was the movement director on the piece. And that was really good, actually, to get into the play, into the world physically, because even though a lot of the people are playing residents, I play a care worker, the actors and actresses playing the residents aren't as old as they're playing. So even to get into the world of being older in a care home, none of them are like that. They're all sharp and really physically fit. But, to kind of add that to the world and add that to their characters. So there was a lot of work that Imogen did with us regarding our physicalities to each other.
Because it's very fluid. You know, many of you play many different characters, and the Olivier's been reconfigured so it's what they call in the round, rather than having a curtain at the front and all the audience sitting in one place. So that's very different. And people come and go and change character all of the time. So how does that get put together if you're rehearsing bits in sections? Because that must be quite a challenge.
I was going to say that traditionally what would usually happen is that on the first day of rehearsals, you would do a read through where the entire company would read the play from beginning to end, all in one go, all together. And you probably won't do that again for quite a long time. So traditionally you would do that on the first day. And then you would start rehearsing scene by scene, usually. You know, it would usually go, there's usually the way a play is written, most plays, it's fairly obvious which bits, which chunks you can do in isolation to rehearse. And then eventually, as time goes on, you would put all those chunks together, and then, you know, hopefully you have a play at the end of it. With this production, I remember Lindsay talking about the idea that even though the play itself is sort of split up into lots of little vignettes or moments or little scenes, that actually there's sort of a musical movement to it, and it does need to flow through. And so the danger in a way was to break it up into little sections and work on them in isolation. We needed to, and I very much needed to get a sense of how the whole thing moved and why one thing comes after another in this particular version of the story, and how, what echoes and resonances there are between sections and scenes and characters. And so it was really important to not break it up into chunks in that way. And also in terms of learning it, I've done one play previously where I'd learnt the whole thing before we started rehearsals. And I think actors tend to resist doing that because you don't want to make too many decisions or choices before you're actually working with the other actors. But when I did Caligula many years ago at the Donmar, Michael Grandage, who directed that, said, look, I think you should probably try and get as much of it under your belt before you start. And I did, and it really helped. And so I thought, well, I would try and do as much of that as I could with this as well, because I didn't want to spend the entire time in rehearsals just not knowing the words, you know, because it just gets in the way. So I started trying to learn it, and it is the hardest thing I have ever had to learn. I mean, it wasn't written to be learned; it was written to be read off a page, and I can see why. So from the line learning aspect, also, it wasn't. I didn't do it traditionally.
I normally learn a big part before I do, because it's easier that way, I think, if you know it. But this is the trickiest play I have ever been in as far as rehearsals go. It's the most difficult. And it's because once Michael starts the evening, well, he doesn't start it actually, we start it in the care home, but once he's on, he never goes off again. He's on the whole time. And it's a massive effort. And we do tend to pop on and off doing vignettes, which we did have to rehearse separately, of course, in bits. And the difficulty about the production was Lindsay has a metaphor she uses, which is the feather, which the feather gets blown up into the air, and you have to keep it aloft all the time. So each person, every scene, has to feed into the next scene, and Michael has to pick it up, or whatever happens. It has to be a continuous line all the way through the play, because if it turned into a series of vignettes with Michael doing bits in between, then it wouldn't work at all.
Yeah.
And
that emotional through line,
it's got to be there. And
yeah.
For Michael, it's a massive job. I don't think there's any part I've seen actually that's more difficult to do than this. So for us it's different. It's carnage, frankly, behind the set. I think even Michael might be shocked if he could see the state of the company in the wings, especially during the first week, because everyone is running like mad from one end of the stage to the other behind the scenes. And everyone has lists up about what comes next. Everybody had a special list. And we kept refining the lists, and sometimes we couldn't read the lists and they were in the wrong light. And we said, what do I do now? Oh, I'm off. There was a terrible moment when somebody looked at me and said, I'm off. I didn't know what to say to him.
I turned to describe a character. The character's not there. I've said the lines of another character. I've turned to see a character come on who's not in that scene.
Yes. And
There's been all kinds of things.
I was really hoping Michael didn't notice the night I came on in the wrong costume to play a scene. I thought, oh, this is terrible, because I was going to be off. I've never been off in my life.
I have the easy job, because once I'm on, that's it, I stay there. Everyone else has to go off and constantly changing costumes and characters and props and coming on from different entrances and exits. I don't have to think about it. I just come on and I stay on and just talk.
Yeah. And sometimes the difference between you being one character and the next is quite extreme, and you've only had a couple of minutes. So how do you do that? Is there an element of putting on a different costume that helps you to be the different person? Because you can kind of have a trail of the person you were, presumably, when you end back up on the stage being somebody different. And they're very different characters you play.
I think it helps me because they are so different, because the characters are so different. So I can never get them muddled, because they're completely different. And costume is a huge thing, actually. The costumes are completely different. So that makes you feel like that character anyway. So that's most of it for me. But I think it's just that simple, because the characters are so extremely different that I can't play them the same. And the costumes do help in making me feel physically different anyway. And also because there is sheer panic sometimes, because it goes by so quick, you just don't have time. So it's just that thing, I think, of just, you just have to. the adrenaline just takes you on anyway. So you don't have time to panic about it, I guess. You just do it.
And they're so vividly drawn as characters. I mean, Dylan Thomas, that's part of the joy of any production of Under Milk Wood, is that it is this burst of life of a community with these characters who are so full of character. And I suppose, if anything, one of the things that I think I've heard people say about this production as well is that what they've enjoyed is how rooted the characters are in this production, that they're not caricatures, even though they are so vividly drawn by Dylan Thomas and made into very particular characters, that you believe them. You believe that they're real people in this production, maybe more than maybe in some other productions where they go for the more sort of almost cartoonish-like qualities of the characters, perhaps.
I also think without a director like Lindsay Turner, who is prepared to work 23 hours a day, as far as I can make out. I don't think she sleeps. I don't know when she sleeps. It would have been a very different show, because to accomplish what Michael was talking about really takes one person at the center of it to make it happen. And she has been she's been extraordinary, I think.
Yeah.
Quite extraordinary.
I think, if anything, if there is a top achievement of this production, it's that I hope that it seems that people talk about it flowing and being very fluid, and that there is an apparent simplicity to it. It is the single most complicated production of anything I've ever been involved with. The layers of complexity, let alone the COVID thing of, you can't come 2 meters. We're doing a production of a play that is, I mean, for a Welsh company, it's it's the most well-known play there is. I mean, and we're doing a very different version of it in some respects. We're playing with two different versions of reality, both layered over each other, and trying to make all that work is incredibly the staging of it. I mean, Lindsay having to work out how people get off and on, how you get furniture off and on, where do you have to go in order to be able to come back as that character? I mean, it's unbelievably complicated. Aside from just trying to do it as well as you possibly can, just the working out of it. And you asked about, rehearsals. One of the big things that happened early on in rehearsals was literally trying to work out, how do we make this two different realities work? How do we go from the reality of the care home, which we're trying to make as almost documentary-like real? How do you go from that into Dylan Thomas's text of Under Milk Wood? How do we make that work? How do people within the care home suddenly become characters? What's the logic of that? And how do we theatrically make that work? It wasn't that we sort of turned up on day one and that had been worked out. I mean, there had been some workshops. In fact, Kez was involved in one of the workshops, as was I, well before, with young graduates, people who had just graduated from drama school, mainly Welsh young actors, and we sort of played around with a few ideas. But when we turned up to start rehearsals, we didn't know how that was going to work. So there was a lot of experimentation, and that's scary in its own right, because we'd made this decision of how we were going to approach this. we didn't know if it was going to work or not. So we had to kind of work that out as we were doing it. So I want to reiterate what Siân is saying, that the sheer amount of work that Lindsay had to do in order to kind of pull this together and make it work is sort of mind-bending, and I'm just in awe of what she has managed to do with this. And may I add an extra complication, which was that Carl wasn't even in rehearsals for the first 10 days because he had to isolate because he tested positive. So we didn't even have Carl, who plays my dad.
Well, maybe this is it. So you've got a very basic set where objects change into other objects. There is a lovely underscoring of music, but not that much. There are a few lighting changes, but not many. So it's not that there's all the whiz bang wallop to hide things. It felt really like watching a beating heart.
If you're going to do a difficult play, and this is a very, very difficult play to do, the National is the place to do it, because the support you get here from, for example, the property department, the props department, the place where they make the things that we use on the stage, they are so inventive, they are the best. And it's a huge department, and their contribution to the play is considerable. And you have the most wonderful technical backup at the National for whatever you want to do.
This is, in some ways, this is a perfect play production to showcase the National, because every single department and area of expertise here is absolutely working at full stretch on this production in such a way as to not draw attention to itself, so that it seems simple and it all happens. But that's kind of the brilliance of it, really. I think that's absolutely right, Siân.
One of the things that I think again works so brilliantly between the framing and the Dylan Thomas to begin at the beginning is his beautiful language, his extraordinary, beautiful language. It is poetry, it is music, whether it's Oh My Dead Dears or Dogs in Wet-Nose Yards, all of these things. It, for me, made it sing, because we'd come from this very different type of dialogue beforehand. What I did want to ask you, particularly Michael, of course, but actually everybody, how do you not trip yourself up with these words? Because they are so precise in terms of the imagery and the symbolism and the colors. And it felt almost like running, that if you just tripped on one black crow black, you could go right down on your face. I mean, how do you keep it kind of at the higher level rather than the very detailed level if a word goes, or Siân isn't on stage, or Kez has come on and the wrong hat, or what? How do you keep hold of those words? They're so extraordinarily complicated.
I wish there was a shortcut, and I think non-acting people think that somehow actors have some extra skill that allows you to learn things. Like there's no shortcut. There's no easy way to do it, or there certainly isn't for me. I've also discovered that I have to go through the whole play every day. I have to go through all the lines before every single performance, and some speeches I have to go over multiple times every day, even now, whilst we're in performance. Because I can't, with a lot of plays, at a certain point you show up and do the play, and you do your warm-up and you do your preparation, whatever that might be, to get in the right space in your head and all that. But you don't necessarily go over all the lines. You know the lines, and you walk on stage and you do them. I can't take that risk with this, because, like you say, if I get one word wrong, the whole thing comes crashing down. Like it's like someone running very, very fast. Like when I was a football player, and the people who would run on the wings. I used to play with a boy called Brian Thorne, who played in Baglam Boys Club, and he was this skinny little thing, and he used to run faster than I'd ever seen anyone run. But if anyone blew on him whilst he was running, he would go spiraling off the pitch. And it's like that doing this play. If you get up to such a speed and such a level of commitment, which is what I have to get to make every word count in this play. I don't want anything to just sort of go by the by. I want the audience to hear every single word and get every image that Dylan Thomas was intending. I want to get all the ideas, all the colors, all the imagery. And in order to do that, you have to kind of hit it at a certain level and keep at that level all the way through. And it's like running incredibly fast. I don't mean you have to say it quickly, although you do have to give it energy and drive. But it's at a level, a pitch level of commitment that if you get one word wrong, it's like Brian Thorne going flying off the pitch. And so I have to be absolutely on it all the time, and I have to go through it constantly. And I realized, for the first time really, that because of the kind of alliteration that Dylan Thomas uses, so he uses a lot of literary things that he was very interested in. So using words that sound quite similar next to each other, and to create sort of bringing words together that don't normally go together, but they might sound very similar. And I realized that my brain, when I'm remembering lines, I'm not, the line I'm saying is not the line I'm thinking about necessarily. My brain is thinking about the next line or words further down the path. And I realized that with this, it's like doing tongue twisters. The word I'm thinking of that's ahead is so similar to the word I'm actually saying that it's easy to mess it up, because if I'm thinking of the word jumbly and I'm saying the word bumbly, it's very easy to go, but it all just crashes down. So I've had to kind of rewire my brain a little bit with this, and I just have to know it inside out, backwards. I just have to know it so well and so confidently that I don't worry about it. And I can only do that if I've literally been constantly going over it all day, every day, all the time. People must think I'm a mad person wandering around, because that's all I do is just go blah, 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 saying the words.
Just a couple of things I wanted to ask you, Siân, and you, Kez, is that there are some extraordinary female characters. You know, Michael before said that nobody's a caricature, and the way that the production's been put together makes it feel as if you are meeting all of these women, the different women, the different people they are. With Polly Garter, Siân, she's always, you know, she's very loving, shall we say? This is how she is described. You play her with a real plangency and a tenderness, and you have a particular song that you sing.
I'd not noticed Polly Garter all that much actually before. I'd never, but I thought, I'd quite like to sing that song. So it's a very interesting little song. It's got lots of levels to it, that song, and it seems a simple little thing, and it is a simple little thing. And when you think of her character, it's quite a complicated little thing. So her character and the fact that she sings that song are a kind of interesting conundrum, if you like.
But it also helps that it reinforces that sense of the layering of memory. Yes, and all the dead departed and the ghosts that are there.
It does.
It was very, very, very beautiful.
Yes.
And Kez, when you're in your lovely negligee, shall we say, you're a very different character when you're Rosie compared to how you are when you open the show in the care home. But there is a similarity of affection and someone who is warm and looking after these slightly damaged older men. Do you kind of see them as two sides of the same kind of character?
Yeah, and they do, because I think that the Tony, the actor playing Captain Cat, Anthony, he is the relationship that I have with him as Kelly in the care home and Rosie Probert. We have the same kind of parallel relationship. It's just then the characters change from Kelly in the care home to Rosie Probert, the prostitute. So I'm playing with the same actor with both people, so I've built up a relationship with him in the care home, this kind of warm kind of character with the other characters as well, but in particular Tony, and then I address him as Rosie Probert, and it's the same kind of relationship but obviously extremely different.
One of the other aspects that was there from very early on in the conversations that Lindsay and I had about how we were going to approach this production was that I was very interested in exploring the things that I consider to be I don't want to use the word flaws, but contradictions within Dylan Thomas himself, and things that I find problematic within the text and in what Dylan Thomas has written and his sort of worldview and how he sees people, particularly women, particularly alcohol, all this sort of romanticizing of certain elements that I think he had issues with in his life. I mean, clearly he was a man, you know, who had issues around alcohol. He had issues around relationships, women, all this kind of stuff. And I always felt that within the play, within what he wrote, under the umbrella of great affection for humanity generally, and a kind of a sort of a wonderful acceptance and embracing of life in all its craziness and flaws and all the rest of it, vulnerabilities. There was also something else going on in there that I thought was really interesting and that I wanted to explore, and that I thought we had the opportunity to explore in this production through my character. Given that I was the one who was saying these things, that if I was an actual character, then whatever complexities there were in Dylan Thomas would sort of come out potentially through me in the character I played. And so that started to develop a lot of things around the relationship that Kez and I have in the play that you see echoes of in other characters, and things around characters like Polygata. You know, I always felt like I had some difficulty with a woman who has, you know, who talks about having had sex with lots and lots of men and have babies with lots and lots of men. And where are they? We don't know. They've gone away. She has sex in the woods and then she has babies, and she's perfectly happy with that, and it's all fine. Written by a man who clearly had sex with a lot of women and didn't really deal with the repercussions of it. You know, I can see that there is a desire on that man's part to make that okay, and that there is an element, an aspect of Polygata that makes that okay for him. And so we wanted to un-okay that in the production as a whole, so to bring out the difficulties and the complexities, but at the same time never lose sight that it is ultimately a hugely forgiving play of mankind and womankind and humanity. And so the story that we tell, I think, is one of hope and redemption and forgiveness and positivity, but whilst not just not ignoring, but actively seeking the difficulties and the darknesses and the complexities and the flaws within it.
The moment of the bullying where the lost penny is explained, essentially, is very moving, and Captain Cat sitting there and hearing the children. I mean, there are so many things that are heart-stopping.
Yeah. I mean, I have the great privilege of being on the stage, you know, pretty much throughout, and to see these things happening and to feel these sort of currents of emotion and feeling that flow through this play and this production. And, you know, moments like when Sheen, as Polygata, sings her song about, you know, the men that she has been with or loved or have loved her, and the one that, you know, that she can't forget the most is the one who has died and gone. And to see, you know, the character who's my father, who we know has lost his wife, I have lost my mother, and to see him listening to this woman sing about loss and death, and to see him clearly remembering his own wife as he watches Polygata. There's so many layers of things going on there, but I'm realizing that my father is sort of remembering his wife, and I'm thinking, of course, I've only ever seen my father as my father, and I've got my issues with him as my father, and now I'm seeing him here as a man who has an independent life to me, and who lost the woman that he loves and has been with for so long. And of course, then in the scene with Rosie Probert and Captain Cat, it's all about the one love of his sea life that he's lost and he wishes could come back. And of course, this is a story that I'm telling to my father, influenced by what is going on inside my father. And I'm discovering who my father is through the telling of this story, in the same way as we sort of all discover who we are through the telling of stories and sharing stories on a stage. That's why we're here. And so it's such a powerful way to come back together again in these shared spaces where we share our stories. The audience come to share their story with us as much as we share Dylan Thomas' story with them. We all come and we meet and we share this story, and the audience bring their experiences and their feelings and their losses and their dreams, and we bring ours, and hopefully, you know, something gets shared in that magic circle of stones, as we call it in this.
The last question for you all. You've talked so honestly about the challenges of the rehearsal process, what it's like, what an extraordinary, complicated and brilliant but difficult play this has been to do for all sorts of reasons. What do you want the audiences to leave the theatre feeling? Do you want them to fall in love with Dylan Thomas if they didn't already? Do you want them to see something they'd never seen in Under Milkwood?
Two things for me. Falling in love with language again, and the importance of language, because it's so beautiful, obviously, Dylan Thomas's writing, but in a day and age as well where, you know, it's all on your phone, and that sense of community, really, but what it means to actually, what relationships actually mean, and being with each other in the physical, and actually how much we've taken that for granted, or I certainly might have before COVID, but what that actually means now in this new kind of thing during and after COVID, but the beauty and simplicity and how needed it is, community and relationships.
There's so much loss in this play, and so much joy, so much life, and in that life is death and loss and sadness and yearning, as well as, and I think that the importance of that, of course, is to therefore, if you embrace that, then you have to throw yourself into life and to be present and to love what is in front of you, to love your family because they won't be there, to love your parents because they won't be there,
Well, I'm very affected by it every night. I watch a lot of it off stage. Normally in a play, you kind of go to your place or your corner or you do whatever. But I find with this, I just watch it all the time. And what I take away from it every night is the same thing, really. It's just the acceptance of the human condition, of forgiveness and acceptance, really, I suppose.
Well, I don't think we can finish on a better note than that. So it's been an enormous pleasure to talk to you, Michael Sheen, Siân Phillips and Kezrena James, and of course to the whole company, amazing company of Under Milkwood. I genuinely think not just because of the pandemic, but it's going to be one of those productions that people will say, did you see it? And if you want a bit more, go to the NT bookshop. You can read Under Milkwood for yourself. But for now, from all of us, a huge thank you to the audiences too, and everybody at the NT that's made this possible. And I'll see you all again very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Kate.
Goodbye.
Goodbye,
Thank
everyone.
You.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Bye.
everybody. Goodbye.